Hi, I'm Steve Farrell, the Worldwide Coordinating Director for Humanities Team. This program is called Pathway to an Integral World. I've been looking forward to this program since we first started planning it. We are going to explore the leading edge of consciousness, of spirituality, and of evolution. And we are going to talk to perhaps one of the most brilliant thought leaders of our time. If you've wanted to know the difference between waking up and growing up, this program is for you. I have the pleasure of introducing you to our special guest now, Ken Wilber. Ken is the founder of the Integral Institute. He is a distinguished author of such subject matter as mysticism, philosophy, ecology, and developmental psychology. He is one of the most widely read and influential philosophers of our time. The San Francisco Chronicle has called him a clarion call for seeing the world as a whole. Welcome, Ken. Great to have you with us.
Hello, Steve. How are you, buddy?
I'm great. And, Ken, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
All right, let's go straight into it.
Okay.
Integral Life recently published something on the rebirth of spirit. It said, one of the greatest contributions integral consciousness is making in the world is the reclamation of the spiritual. It goes on to say, we have allowed almost every other field of human inquiry to mature, but not spirituality. Why is spirituality a laggard in today's society? Can you talk a little bit about this? And how is Integral Life helping to rebirth spirituality?
Sure. And we need a little bit of background for understanding this. One is that there are at least two major forms or roles of spirituality. And one of them is spirituality is a worldview. It's a way of looking at the world. It's a way of making meaning. It's a narrative. It's a story. Most of the world's great religions consist of stories about their founders and the miraculous deeds they did. Christianity, of course, is a story of what purports to be the only Son of God and his life story and his crucifixion and raising from the dead and whatnot. And so it creates a worldview that attempts to answer a lot of the major sort of perplexing questions that humanity has. And in this regard, it's a form of what's called spiritual intelligence. Most people, of course, have heard of multiple intelligences. Howard Gardner introduced the term. We have not only cognitive intelligence, but we have emotional intelligence, we have moral intelligence, we have interpersonal intelligence, we have kinesthetic intelligence, and we also have spiritual intelligence. And as different as these intelligences are, and they're known as developmental lines because they all unfold and develop through a series of stages or levels. As different as they all go through essentially the same levels of development. So we have about a dozen different developmental lines going through about 6 or 7 developmental levels. And these levels can be known by many different names. Some of the simplest names were given to them by a developmental pioneer named Gene Gebser, and he called these levels archaic to magic, to mythic or traditional values, to rational or modern values, to pluralistic or postmodern values, and to integral. And that's spiritual intelligence moves through those stages as well. And so there's an archaic spirituality, there's a magic spirituality, there's a mythic spirituality, a rational spirituality, pluralistic spirituality, and integral spirituality. Most of the forms of worldview that I was talking about are at the mythic level and have stayed at the mythic level, in a sense got stuck at the mythic level ever since the Enlightenment. And at the Enlightenment, we saw most of the other disciplines, most of the other intelligences continue to develop. So we saw science move from mythic forms of knowledge into rational forms. And we saw the explosion of modern physics and modern chemistry and biology and ground-breaking discoveries. And most other of the intelligence have continued to grow and develop. But for some reason, spirituality got stuck at the mythic literal level. And one of the reasons is that many forms of religion, if you don't believe the story, then you're going to burn in hell forever. So there's not a lot of incentive to let go of the mythic version. You really have to believe that God rained down frogs on the Egyptians, and Moses really did part the Red Sea, and all of these sorts of mythic stories, and you have to take them as the literal word of God, or you are in deep, deep trouble. Whereas, in fact, of course, spiritual intelligence actually continues to grow and develop, and we have significant number of developmental studies showing this. And what happens is just that the worldviews get more and more sophisticated, and by the time you get to the integral level, the story, the worldview, is one of the interconnectedness of all things and events in the universe, and that you are also one with everything. You are interconnected with everything that is growing and evolving in the universe. A very sophisticated view and a very sophisticated meaning. But the West got stuck at that mythic literal level. And because if you let go of it, you're going to fry in hell forever. And so that version, the first form of spirituality, which is a worldview or narrative, we got stuck at that. And we've been stuck at that mythic literal form of spirituality for almost 300 years. Now, alongside of that, there's a second form of spirituality that's just as important. In some ways, it's more important. And that has to do with not ways that we grow up. And that's what the multiple intelligences are about, are the stages we go through as we grow up intellectually, as we grow up emotionally, as we grow up cognitively, as we grow up morally, and we move through increasingly sophisticated stages of development on our way to integral and higher understandings. But in addition to growing up, there is a genuinely mystical event called waking up. And it's variously known as enlightenment or satori, awakening. And this is a universal experience of not just thinking about the world as being an interconnected whole, but of actually experiencing the world as being an interconnected whole, and you being one with that wholeness. And so you transcend your small, separate self. You no longer feel confined to, as Alan Watts said, the skin-encapsulated ego, but you feel one with the entire universe. It's extraordinarily liberating and freeing and awakening experience, and it changes people profoundly. And that, of course, is one of the major aims of religion around the world as well. One is not only to sort of tell a narrative that makes sense of the world, but one is to wake up from all narratives and wake up from all conceptions and have a direct experience of spirit itself, a direct experience of the entire universe as it's arising moment to moment. Now, we got caught in that worldview at mythic literal. And as that happened, the church started to distrust mystical experience, because mystical experience has a nasty way of bypassing the church and going straight from spirit to you. And it's sort of the same reason that the oil companies don't like solar energy. It has a nasty way of bypassing them and going straight to an individual who can use solar energy as and if they have panels. So we got frozen on our spiritual intelligence line of growing up at a mythic literal fundamentalist level of development. And then we tossed out the meditative or the mystical or the awakening aspect of spirituality. And so in both of those cases, we got left really with what in some ways are the worst aspects of spirituality and the worst aspects of religion, which is fundamentalistic and ethnocentric, and I have the one and only way, and if you don't believe in my religion, I'm sorry, I love you, but you're going to burn in hell forever. And so religion has become less and less a significant part of intelligent people's lives, whereas in fact what they're missing is the most significant aspects of religion, which they haven't had a chance to tap into because our culture has in effect tossed them out. And so what we are doing at Integral Institute, and what is starting to happening in a lot of places around the world, is redoing both of these aspects. We're looking at spiritual intelligence and looking at the higher stages that go beyond mythic literal and move into rational or modern stages, and then pluralistic or postmodern stages, and then integral stages, or holistic or unified stages of meaning and narrative and worldview. And we're introducing meditative states, and which follow a general series of state developments that's very similar in all of the contemplative traditions around the world, and moves us from gross waking states through subtler and subtler states of awareness and consciousness as we move deeper and deeper into our own being. And when we get to the very core of our being, we find a oneness with spirit, and we awaken to our true self. We awaken to what the Sufis call the supreme identity, the identity of our own self with spirit itself. And that's held to be the sort of ultimate goal and aim of human growth and development, and the sort of highest realization that one can have, which is of ultimate reality and one's true self. And so both of those aspects of spirituality have an entirely different flavor from what we get normally, and certainly, different than the fundamentalists offer, and different than we get in Sunday school, and different than you get in the New York Times editorial pages when the culture wars are going full force and the scientists are arguing with typical mythic believers, which is not hard argument. I mean, how hard is it to argue that God really didn't rain down frogs and Moses really didn't part the Red Sea. I mean, that's not a terribly difficult thing to demonstrate. But as for higher stages of spiritual intelligence, there's they start to connect up with a lot of the discoveries in science. They're certainly completely compatible with evolution and evolutionary unfolding. What science is lacking is a means of waking up and awaking from the dream of the separate self and its constricted modes to one's true and real identity and a oneness with the entire cosmos, moment to moment. So we're reintroducing both aspects of spirituality and its truer and deeper meanings, and it's really quite profound.
Wow. Amazing, Ken. There's so much that you covered there. Let me just though go to one item that certainly I think about, and maybe some of the listeners are thinking about here as well. Naturally, our desire is to accelerate through these processes. You described the growing up process, going through these stages of development, and then the waking up process, where we're going beyond thinking to experiencing the oneness.
Right.
Are there ways to accelerate the processes, or what are the best practices here? And I'm sure it ties to your work at Integral Life.
Yeah, what we have found is that in both growing up and waking up, one of the best ways to accelerate both of these developmental processes is through a type of cross-training where more than one aspect of the psyche is trained simultaneously. So, for example, if you take meditators and divide them into two groups and have one group just meditate, have the other group meditate and lift weights, and you do that for 3 months, and then ask the teachers, the meditation teachers, who don't know what their individual groups are doing, but ask them to rate how well their students are doing. The ones that meditate and lift weights show further advancement in meditation than ones that just meditate. So it's a type of spiritual cross-training. And this has given rise to various forms known as things like integral transformative practice or integral life practice. And it simply means that we combine several different practices, including body practices, mental practices, and spiritual practices to cover body, mind, and spirit. And instead of just doing spiritual practices, we do bodily exercises and mental exercises. And that cross-training seems to accelerate growth and development in all of them. And so that's one of the recent discoveries that we've made, and it's the foundation of a lot of newer and more sort of progressive forms of spiritual practice. And you can, of course, find out about that at the integrallife.com website, or any of my books, or Mike Murphy and George Leonard's book, The Life We Are Given, and so on. So there are ways to accelerate this process. And in particular, the point is to get it unstuck, get it past that mythic level, and get it into higher levels of development, and then also just start engaging a spiritual practice. Most forms of spiritual practice has some sort of practice on focusing in the now moment, or focusing on the present moment, and dropping the past and the future, and simply allowing one's awareness to rest in the present moment without thoughts of yesterday or thoughts of tomorrow. And that present is the pathway to the timeless now, and timelessness is classic eternity. Eternity doesn't mean everlasting. It means a moment. It doesn't mean everlasting in time. It means a moment without time. It means a timeless moment where you transcend the sense of being caught in time and space altogether and find yourself in this eternal present that is free and liberated and fulfilling. And so cross-training, in a word, is one of the ways we found that can really accelerate these processes.
Interesting. So cross-training goes beyond our gym here, doesn't it? Comes
yes.
out into the spiritual world.
It does.
That link, incidentally, that Ken mentioned, let me mention it briefly now. At the end of the program, we'll share it again. It's http://integrallife.com/global oneness. I'll share that again at the end of the program. And if you're on the webinar, you'll see that link as well. Ken, integral consciousness sometimes focuses on awakening, enlightenment, and atonement. How do you make these things engaging, practical, and valuable for people that aren't necessarily on the oneness path?
Right. Well, first of all, most people don't really know what those terms mean, and if they do, they're used to having them associated with traditional fundamentalist biblical meanings. And so one of the first things is just a simple matter of education, that there are different types of spirituality, and these different types of spirituality have extraordinary characteristics that are dramatically different than what you have been taught if you're simply believing in a fundamentalist worldview. Fundamentalist worldview is often about sin and atonement and what not to do, and how if you do violate any of the rules or principles, you're going to essentially fry in hell forever. And it gives the world a rather sour note. I think H.L. Mencken said something like a fundamentalist was somebody who had the worry that somebody somewhere was having a good time. And that's essentially the sort of standard story that we get from most forms of fundamentalist religion. It's just the opposite with higher stages of religion and with mystical practices of spirituality. You hear terms that the texts often use are things like being, consciousness, bliss, happiness, joy, love, and these can be overwhelming positive feelings that just dramatically alter how it feels to be alive, and it brings a deep optimism to life. It brings a deep joy to life. If you want to get into sort of pickier details, there's hundreds of studies showing that the practice of meditation, for example, can increase cognitive intelligence, will increase essentially the scores on virtually any of the multiple intelligences, increases one's capacity for relationship and for success in relationship, decreases enormous number of types of illnesses and sicknesses, and increases health across the board. One of the most surprising things that we found is that we talked about the multiple intelligences that human beings have and through which they grow up. And one of the things that we found is that individuals move through the earlier stages of these multiple intelligences fairly easily until late adolescence and early adulthood. So they might move from archaic to magic to mythic to rational. And then their development, their transformation stops. And there's virtually nothing that's been tried that can successfully move an adult human being more than 0.25 stages on average in any multiple intelligence. So in other words, once you are in late adolescence, early adulthood, the stage that you're at in any of those multiple intelligences is essentially the stage you're going to be at for most of your life. And we've tried things like psychoanalysis and psychotherapy and exercise, and any number of those things won't budge a person's average level of development, except meditation. And meditation, for somebody who meditates 4 years, as one example, will advance an average of 2 full stages in these intelligences. It's the only thing that's ever been demonstrated to move an adult human being through stages of these multiple intelligences. And so that's a profound discovery in itself, and ought to make meditation a part of any college education if you want to really round out your education and advance your intelligences across the board. So that's a rather startling insight, but it's been repeated numerous times now with several different types of meditation, and essentially similar results are found. So most of the time, it's just a matter of educating people a little more accurately about what's involved with integral consciousness. And integral consciousness involves, of course, not just spiritual consciousness, but one of the reasons that it's called integral is we mentioned the earlier stages of development, going from archaic to magic to mythic to rational to pluralistic. And these stages are all generally referred to as first tier, since they're the earliest stages to emerge. And so far to date in human history, the pluralistic or postmodern is the highest stage that's yet emerged in any significant fashion. And the next stage to emerge is generally referred to as integral. And one of the things that all of the researchers studying integral have found is something that's extremely interesting. And that is that, first of all of the stages at first tier whether it's magic or mythic or rational or pluralistic, traditional values, modern values, or postmodern values, they all think that their values are the only true and real values in existence. And all the others are wrong. Just flat out wrong, confused, backwards, stupid, childish, whatnot. Integral is the first stage of development in a human being that has an intuition that somehow all of the previous stages are true but partial. They all have some sort of truth to offer. They all have something, some reason for existence. They're all there not just because they're wrong or idiotic or stupid, but because they're an intrinsic part of the growth and development of the human mind. And that's exactly right. All of these early stages are like the alphabet of the human psyche. They're tools that are continually added to the human mind to increase its capacity to handle various types of issues and problems and questions. And so the integral stage is most of the early pioneers gave that integral stage the name either integrated or integral or something like that, because it could integrate all of the previous stages. It found something of value in all of the previous stages. Now, we're at the point right now where about 5% of the population has moved into integral stages. So we're actually right on the verge of a transformation into integral levels of consciousness. And when that starts to happen, we'll actually have an awareness. We'll actually have societies. We'll have cultures that are radically inclusive for the first time in history. All of the previous stages, because they are antagonistic to each other, because they hate each other, because they think they're wrong or confused, cause essentially nothing but culture wars, to oppression, to actual wars. And as long as humanity is trapped in those fragmented and partial stages of development, we will be trapped in various forms of hatred and animosity and oppression and warfare. Only as we start to move into integrative or truly holistic or truly integral stages of development will we start to inhabit a space of harmony, or a space of inclusiveness, or a space that is not always looking to get into a fight or try to prove that the other person's value structures are wrong, but find ways to include the other value structures in much more encompassing and embracing society. And that has never, ever, ever happened to humanity since our emergence on the planet some million years ago. So we're standing right on the brink of a transformation where just a larger percentage, and it only takes about 10% of a culture to move into the leading edge, to have those values then start to seep through the culture. So we're looking to see about 10% of the population reach integral. And when that happens, we expect to see those integral values kind of permeate the culture as a whole. Even though only about 10% of the population will actually be at those levels, it sort of opens the door and starts this process of expanding one's value system. And so we are right on the edge of that right now. And that's why people are starting to talk a little bit more about integral. You start to hear the word pop up here or there, or we start to see more systemic approaches or more inclusive approaches. And that's on everything from local problems to global problems. And, of course, global problems can only be handled with a global mindset, which is an integral mindset. So we're right on the edge of a very, very important transformation that's right now is underway.
Fantastic. And, of course, that's what, as you share, that's what Integral is about. That's what the Shift Network is about. And that's what Global Oneness Day is about, which is the work of humanity's team. We've got about 8 minutes left in this panel, and we should have 2 more hours here, Ken, because this is fascinating, as it always is, to be able to review these things with you. I wanted to just see if we could do 2 things in the next 8 minutes. At the end, talk a little bit about, invite you to talk about how people can become involved with you. But before we get to that, you mentioned just the importance of meditation when
Right.
you were talking here just a moment ago, and I wanted to get this question in your AQAL, which of course is all quadrants, all levels diagram. Right. You share that the external world is getting all of the focus, or most of the focus, and that the internal world over on the left side has been marginalized, is receiving much less attention. You say it creates a flatland, which is dysfunctional. And I wanted to just ask you, do you, you've talked a little bit to this actually already, but do you see this changing? Is, are you, is your work giving this focus and helping to, adjust the flatland that is there today?
Well, that's a part of what is going on. Now, we, if you look back historically at how different epochs have given different attention to the interiors of humans, the left-hand quadrants, versus the exteriors, the external world, the sensorimotor world, the material world, and so on. You can see kind of shifts going back and forth and back and forth. It was common in mythic era, for example, that individuals gave a great deal of attention to their interior life, and prayer was a very important part of their life, and a belief in the myths taken literally took a great deal of their time and their energy. And the understanding of the exterior world was rather limited and rather minimal. I mean, it was still a flatland world. We literally thought the earth was flat, and we thought that the sun circled the earth, and our understanding of the exterior, external world was just very, very minimal. And then we had the extraordinary move from the mythic level to the rational level, and with that, the emergence of the Enlightenment. And that brought, in particular, an explosion of scientific approaches to the exterior world. And that just also exploded our understanding of the external world. From Kepler, Galileo, Newton, we have the rise of modern physics, we have the rise of modern biology, we have the rise of geology, and all of a sudden, the world of science has stepped in and just begun to dominate the scene. And many enormously positive things came from that. I am not a science basher and not anti-enlightenment. Though what did happen, and many, many philosophers started to notice this, is that science started to colonize the other spheres, in particular art and morals. And so these interior worlds of art and morals started to get pushed aside for the external world of science. And this has several sort of derogatory terms. One is called scientism, one is called scientific materialism. And the bad thing wasn't the existence of science and the extraordinary discoveries it was making. It was that science felt that if its methods couldn't answer a question, then that question was either confused or nonsensical or couldn't be answered or wasn't worth answering. And unfortunately, exterior-oriented science can't answer any of the questions about our interiors. Like, does spirit exist? Or, even the nature of the psyche, or things that we learn through introspection and morals and art. All of that got colonized by science, got reduced to exterior flatland and then essentially tossed out. And so for several hundred years, the whole life world was dominated by science. And we got this flatland world, flatland conception, and no understanding of interiors. The interiors got frozen to where they were, so our spiritual intelligence, for example, got frozen at the mythic level, and there it stayed for 300 years, becoming increasingly more ridiculous to believe as science continued to find out, in a sense, the truth about what was really going on in the external world. The myths of the Bible started to look sillier and sillier, and so you have people like Tertullian having to say, well, I believe it because it's absurd. And so we've now, really in the last 30 or 40 years, so many new discoveries in science has pointed to the necessity of including interiors in an understanding of exteriors. So even, for example, the role of the brain, which would be approached in an exterior objective fashion, we now understand has an extraordinary role to play in actually creating the external world that we see. And it's our mental intentionality actually gets translated directly into brain structure. It actually alters the structure of the brain. And that's an interior reality that science can no longer deny. And so slowly what started to happen is that the interior realms have started to sort of force their way back into the scene. And that includes also, in terms of spirituality, we begin looking at actual meditation studies. And we looked at what happened to the brain when people do long-term meditation. And it's profound. There's probably not a single capacity of the brain that isn't enhanced by long-term meditation. And we started getting proof of this by studying long-term meditators and studying their brains with functional MRIs. So that's all part of this kind of integral revolution that's going on, is that the interiors have been making a comeback. And that's not only in terms of things like developmental psychology and an understanding of mental intentionality and brain structure, but it's also including things like spirituality and an understanding of more sophisticated forms of spirituality and what those can do for us and our life, as opposed to simply the fundamentalist beliefs. So it's changing. And there is a important shift that's in the air. And you all are tracking this. We're tracking it. There's more and more organizations like ours that are coming online and are sharing in this revolution that's going on. And as more and more people actually develop into integral stages of development, the demand for an understanding of the interiors as well as the exteriors does nothing but continue to grow. And that's what I'm sure you're seeing, that's what we're seeing, and that's good news. That really is good news, because the problems that humanity is starting to face right now, the really wicked problems, are all global. Virtually all of the main problems that we have are global, and something that a single nation does won't do any good in working with these problems. If the United States cut back its carbon emission 100%, that wouldn't change global warming at all. It's something the entire world has to get involved in. The same goes for the financial crisis, terrorism, and so on. So we need global thinking to accompany any attempts to solve these global problems. And that, of course, is part of the integral approach that does that. And the integral approach is arriving none too soon, because these truly wicked global problems are down our throats, and in a bad way.
Absolutely. It is an interconnected world, and thankfully it's awakening, just as you're sharing, Ken. And we're out of time, but I want to thank you so much for this just unbelievable time with you. It's been profound, fascinating, insightful, and a lot more. And I want to thank you and the Integral Institute, Integral Life, your organization, so much for being involved with Global Oneness Day. I also want to refer everybody to the URL where you can learn more about Ken's work and Integral Life. That link, again, is http://integrallife, that's one word, .com/global oneness. And you can learn a lot more about Ken's work and Integral Life there. And thank you also to all of the audience that's been a part of this program. It's been absolutely fascinating. And thank you, and we'll now go to the next panel.